Welcome to another live edition of the DLF Dynasty Podcast. I'm Dan. That's Ryan right there. The first time we've ever really done this actually face-to-face. Ryan's just across the table from me right now, and we're in Indianapolis. We are at the site of a soggy NFL Combine. It was wet today here in Indy, Ryan.
Yeah, it's been a little messy here. Didn't get to walk as much as we had hoped for, but yeah, it was a good day. Good to see these offensive guys, these guys we really care about the most from a dynasty standpoint. Good to see them kind of on the hot seat, and I don't know, I feel like we learned a lot today.
I feel like we did, and we didn't get to see these guys on the field. They weren't running 40s, they weren't lifted weights or anything like that, but they were in front of a microphone, and we had chances to ask all these guys questions. They ran about 8 or 9 or 10 of these guys through at a time.
Yeah.
And we tried to catch as much as we could. Luckily, there were 2 of us, so we could kind of split up and divide and conquer. We're sorry if you guys hear any noise in the background. We're actually doing this from a hotel bar, kind of a room off the side of it. So there's a little bit of noise, but we are in Indianapolis. We're only blocks away from where they're holding the combine and where those DBs are running 40s and running drills. Actually, still right now, I think they might be about wrapped up by now.
Yeah, they're close. Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about what we did today, Ryan. It started with those interviews, and we got rolling right away with some big names.
Yeah, I mean, Bryce Young, 8 a.m. Whether you like it or not, whether you're ready or not, Bryce Young was there at the podium, ready to take some questions, and there were a ton of people. So, Dan, I know you had some questions ready for Bryce Young, but it was tough to get a word in edgewise there for sure.
Yeah, there were a lot of reporters there. Some big names, of course, were there too. Yeah. Some big name reporters. We did get a couple answers though that we were looking forward to. I think it was probably the most important quote that I heard all day as far as being a dynasty manager. And somebody, it wasn't me, it was the question that I really wanted answered, asked him about running the football in college. And or really lack of running in college. He didn't do a lot of that at Ohio State, and people want to know why. And if there was that was Stroud. That's Stroud.
Hey,
I went off on a tangent.
It was
a whirlwind.
It was a whirlwind. Absolutely, players were in and out, and like you said, there were 8, 10, 12 of these guys all at one time. You wanted to hear as much as you could and see as much as you could. But yeah, Young was first, then Stroud came in. And
I'll finish my thought on Stroud since I was going in that direction. People were asking about running, and he seemed to me like he was a little regretful that he wasn't all that active in the running game with the Buckeyes. And he even went as far as saying, I'm going to fix that. As if he wanted to indicate he's going to run at the next level. Or maybe teams were talking to him about that in meetings over the last couple of days. And that's why he brought it up, and he was pretty emphatic about it, I thought.
Well, that's been a point that has come up in the pre-draft process. I mean, I've heard, we've talked about it. I've heard other fantasy analysts, dynasty analysts talk about it. Just really the questions about him not running more at Ohio State. And I mean, we even heard that narrative that the coaching staff there maybe doesn't want their quarterbacks running too much. So there was, like you said, almost a little bit of frustration that he wasn't able to show that off in college.
Yeah, we got a comment here from FF Mad Scientist. He thinks Stroud just didn't need to run since he had all those first-round wide receivers, and that makes sense. We got to talk to some of those guys too, or at least one of them.
Well, they asked. I heard someone ask C.J. Stroud about, getting the receivers the ball and the advantage of playing with these guys, not just Jackson Smith and Jigba, but of course Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson and the other great receivers they have. And he said, I want to eat and I want them to eat.
Yeah, so, man, he was full of good comments.
Absolutely.
But, we don't want to take the whole show up. So if you got a question, you want something answered, whether it be about your fantasy team, maybe one of these guys, we only talked to the quarterbacks, the wide receivers, and the tight ends today. Tomorrow, we're going to talk to some running backs, and we're excited about that. So if you got something on your mind about those guys, let us know as well. We're taking questions about what we're expecting tomorrow, what we saw today, and we're going to keep going through some of these guys that we talked to. Before we hit record tonight, Ryan, we were going through our overall impressions of these players, and whether a player's stock went up or down based on not only what they said, but also like how they acted, how they communicated with us. That's one of the biggest surprises for me of this experience. This is the first time I've been to the combine. I know you're a veteran at this point, been here 3 times. I'm surprised how much their responses and how they treated the media is affecting my feelings about specific players.
Yeah. There's so much to this weekend. Of course, when we watch it on TV and the thoughts go to the 40-yard dash and the things that we see on field. But like you said, seeing these guys in the media interviews, really even seeing them walk around town, you get to see, very, very small glimpses of their personality, of the way they are, literally out on the streets. So those things do start to play into the way you value them. And you got to be careful of that. I remember Drake London last year.
Yeah.
I was really iffy about some of his answers that he gave to some of the questions on media day. So much so that I thought I might even consider moving him down a little bit in my rankings. And
I'm glad you didn't.
Glad I didn't do that. At least not too drastically. So, it's just another piece of the puzzle. Like
and maybe a small piece.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Something to consider when maybe it's enough to be a tiebreaker, 2 equally valued players. But there were a couple that kind of got my attention in the negative light that they just didn't feel comfortable. But there were certainly guys that were charismatic, that were energetic, and guys that I'm rooting for now. I like that guy. I hope he makes it happen at the next level. We do have a couple questions here. Let's start off with Alex. He asks, which quarterback gave you the most confidence today? And we talked about Stroud. I think Stroud officially is the answer to that question for me. But I don't think we can do this without talking about Anthony Richardson. And we didn't see a lot of, or at least I didn't see a lot of his interview. Again, he was surrounded by media. We couldn't get a word in. We couldn't get a foot in the door either to even hear what he had to say. But I caught some of it. Biggest impression of Anthony Richardson is that guy is a monster. Yeah. He is a huge human being. I've never been close to Cam Newton, but I imagine that's what Cam Newton looks like. If I'm a big guy, I'm 6'4", 225, and Anthony Richardson is a big man.
And Anthony Richardson mentioned Cam Newton. He was asked, who is your NFL comp? And he said Cam Newton. That's the type of game he plays. So a lot of us have been making that connection, and I kind of felt validated a little bit with that one. And in many ways, it feels like an obvious one. But you're right. just muscles on top of muscles for Anthony Richardson. We even had one guy in front of us checking out his backside,
his rear end.
Rear end. Every part of him was impressive, I guess. But we got to be careful. We knew Richardson was a beast physically. It's easy to start getting into that counting it twice situation with, in combine weekend. So we'll see what he does tomorrow. I'm sure it's going to be very impressive as we're expecting it to be. So the buzz really all weekend has been about Richardson. Back to Alex's question. I agree that CJ Stroud has to be the answer to this question. He said he was the best player in college football each of the past 2 seasons.
That's true.
He was each of the past 2 seasons.
I really think so. There's an argument to be made, of course, and maybe I'm just falling in love with a player that was charismatic and I really liked coming into it. And I feel like that's been validated, even though he hasn't done it on the field just yet here in Indy. man, I think there's a very good chance that he's the best player in this draft, regardless of position.
That's fair. He did have some great quotes, called himself a ball placement specialist.
I like that.
I mean, of course, he does come into the league known for his accuracy. So I think you know, that's certainly fair statement to say. I mean, he just oozed confidence, but so did Richardson.
Yep.
So did Will Levis. Will Levis said he wanted his goal is to complete his career as the best quarterback of all time, with the most Super Bowls of all time. And I guess if they were pressed, probably every quarterback on that stage, on that podium, would have said the same thing. So, I mean, that kind of comes with the quarterback position.
Absolutely.
They're going to be confident guys. They're going to be natural leaders. And if they're not, that's when we start to really question their long-term role in the league.
Speaking of Levis, there was a question of him where, after saying that he was gonna throw tomorrow and all that stuff, they asked him why are you throwing tomorrow? A lot of guys don't do that. And he had a great quote. He says, "Because I have a cannon."
Yeah,
and it's legit. He does. So again, he has that moxie. He has that charisma. He's a guy that certainly has a lot of confidence. So I hope that answers your question, Kelly McDowell.
Hey, that's my sister.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Great.
There's Grayson in her picture. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. She's a homer too, then.
Yes. Yeah. We're both Kentucky fans. We're both Will Levis fans. As expected, I mean, we knew he would come in and win this weekend from a PR standpoint.
Absolutely.
Great interviewer. So he did well. Honestly, probably didn't do as well. Wasn't necessarily as charismatic.
Sure.
In front of the media as maybe I'd even expected. But I mean, definitely held his own up there. And he does have a cannon, so he'll show that off tomorrow as well.
We had one more quarterback question before we move on to the receivers and the tight ends. This one comes from Monty. He says, how much of a chance Anthony Richardson gets too much steam, gets drafted too high, and becomes the next Trubisky / Tommy Maddox? While we're on all ends of the spectrum there.
Good pull, Monty.
Yeah, nice reference there. Man, that's always a possibility, right? And we don't have to go back very far to find an athletic quarterback that made a lot of headlines around this time of year and slid in the draft.
Yeah.
And, slid from potentially top 10 to he ended up in the third round. So I don't see that happening right now with Anthony Richardson. He's got all the stuff that NFL teams really look for, and NFL GMs are just salivating at the idea of getting this guy in their offense.
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, all the buzz this weekend seems to be very, very positive for Anthony Richardson. And again, we kind of knew it would be. Mm-hmm. What I wasn't sure of is how he would present himself to the media, and came across very confident, very well spoken, very knowledgeable about the game. And again, that kind of goes along with that quarterback position. If they don't have that, you start to worry. But to Monty's question, I think I said it when we did this combine preview last week that I get the idea of pushing Richardson up. The upside is certainly there. What I'm concerned about in Dynasty and in rookie drafts is when he starts to overtake C.J. Stroud, overtake Bryce Young. I can't get on board with that, at least not at this point. We've got a long way to go in this full process. But to me, all three of those guys have very high upside. All three of those guys have some questions about their game, different amount of questions, different levels of questions and concerns. But, pushing Richardson higher than 4 in a super flex draft, and that's already pretty high. That's kind of where I draw the line right now.
Yeah, I think that's all fair. And I think, I just wonder, what's it going to take for us to push him higher? What would it take for us to keep him a lot lower at this point? It's going to come down to draft capital, right? How if a team trades up for him, if he ends up a top 5 pick in the draft, it's going to be hard to pass him up at 4. And maybe even, depending on landing spot, he can jump one of these guys. But it does take those things actually happening before you pull the trigger on something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would take him going ahead of one or both of them in the NFL draft. We don't want to be a total slave to draft capital and draft in that same exact order, but it is so important. And as long as NFL teams are telling us that they're valuing Stroud and Young ahead of Richardson, I think that's probably where I'm going to end up being as well.
Yeah, we have to follow suit on that. Let's move the conversation to the wide receiver position, because there were some impressive guys in that group as well. And we probably should start with C.J. Stroud's teammate, Jackson Smith-Njigba. He was early on. I got to listen to a majority of that interview, and I thought he was another guy that was pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Although, a lot of the slights on JSN are size related, and he looks like a small receiver comparatively to some of the other, even some of the other smaller receivers. He's slight in frame. And that shows up on film too. He's not a huge guy, and he depends on that speed, that quickness. But I really like his moxie behind the microphone as well.
Yeah, he was very confident as well. Going back to what I said about Stroud, and I don't know, maybe I'm connecting the dots a little too much here, but Stroud almost seemed to blame the coaching staff for that running issue or lack of running. JSN, of course, missed much of the season with that hamstring injury, was asked about trying to come back earlier in the year and then, basically not being able to finish out the season. He said he didn't have enough information about how severe his injury was. And that's why he tried to come back and ultimately missed much of the season. So I don't know. Those Ohio State guys seem to have some issues with their leadership right now. Like I said, maybe I'm just connecting too many dots. But regardless of that, Smith-Njigba was super impressive. To me, of the big three that we talk about, he was the most impressive today.
Yeah, I thought so as well. And he was I thought the biggest quote that came from him is that, and maybe it's not a big shocker because all these guys have confidence, especially wide receivers, but he sees himself as a top 5 player in the NFL draft, not just a wide receiver. And he mentioned multiple times how Stephon Diggs is somebody he looks up to and a guy that he could potentially idolize and mimic his game a little bit. He called Diggs' over-exaggeration of his routes something that he looked up to. And I see that now that it's been pointed out to me. Diggs is that kind of player, right? He really gets separation not only through his footwork, but also those shoulder fakes and those big body turns. That creates that separation. If JSN continues to improve in that light, if he becomes that next Stephon Diggs as far as a route runner, and he's already advanced in that way, we could have a true superstar, maybe even a wide receiver 1 in JSN.
Yeah, he thinks he's going to be that. He called himself a 1 of 1, said he is the best at what he does. So C.J. Stroud had the confidence. JSN had the confidence.
That's how they make them down there with the Buckeyes.
It's a Buckeye thing.
Let's jump over to let's talk about Quentin Johnston, because if there was a receiver among those big 3 that made me second guess maybe what I was thinking about him, it was probably Johnston. He was one of the guys that didn't feel all that comfortable in front of the microphone, didn't make a lot of eye contact with those that were asking him questions. And like Ryan said, you don't want to read too much into that. But he just didn't seem very outgoing, seemed a little bbit nervous. A couple of his questions that he answered, Ryan, I thought he had a hard time coming up with his 3 favorite NFL receivers right now, and that just gave me a little pause.
Yeah, that was a little odd. That was actually the only question I got to hear him answer, so I'll have to defer to you for the most part on that one. But again, we just want to be careful with analyzing every single little thing. I did have a conversation with a couple folks about another player today, and their criticism was that he was too rehearsed, too practiced. And, for you to say that about Johnston, that maybe he was nervous or, maybe almost seemed like he was not fully prepared. I guess we're looking for some kind of middle ground between those two, because if you're too robotic, too whatever with your answers, then you're going to draw criticism then as well.
Yeah, and these guys are all drawing criticism with everything that they really say. The one quote that I got from Quentin Johnston, he said he recognized that ball catching is a problem. Clearly, it's been an issue with him. He body catches the football, and I got the impression that this has come up in his interviews with teams. He said he's catching a couple hundred balls every day to get away from body catching, just catching with his hands, and that's, of course, you expect to hear something like that, but just that he didn't ignore the question or sidestep the question in some ways, I thought that was a positive, a plus for Quentin Johnston. So if you're a Johnston guy and you're thinking, maybe it's that pass catching that'll give him trouble, he's working on it, and it's something that he's trying to get better with. So if you guys have any questions about any of these receivers, pass catchers in general, we'll get to tight ends here in a minute too. Send them our way. Any other guys that really got your attention today, Ryan?
Yeah, going a little bit deeper, I guess, outside of those top three. We care about those, but I'm feeling a little bit better about the wide receiver class after today than I was going in, I think. Denzel Mims, or not Denzel Mims, sorry.
Yeah.
Marvin Mims.
There you go.
He was actually asked about Denzel. That was kind of funny. But anyway, Marvin Mims was super impressive to me. Was one of the first guys up on the podium this morning and talked about his consistency, playing with and through multiple coaching staffs, quarterback changes, and just that he was able to produce in each of his college seasons. Like I said, really well spoken. Somebody did ask him about his brother Denzel. He had to let them know that he was not related to Denzel Mims. So that was kind of a funny moment. But yeah, Mims is actually a big winner to me for me after today.
You caught Mims. I caught a lot of Zay Flowers today.
Okay.
And Boston College receiver, he impressed me. Certainly a guy that's moving up my rankings after listening to him talk. He emphatically said that he's not just a slot. He said, I'm not just a slot in response to somebody asking him a question about playing in the slot. And he looks the part right now. I don't know if you guys saw the pictures in the last week or so, but that guy's jacked, and he's not huge as far as height goes. But he told us that he added 13 pounds of muscle. He said he hasn't lost any time on his 40. He's going to impress tomorrow in the 40. So if that's all the facts, if he certainly runs the speed that we expect out of him, and sure, he profiles as a slot guy, he might be moving up boards. He might be closer to an NFL second round pick than maybe a third that we thought maybe he could slide into a month ago. He's been slowly moving on up, and I think he deserves it. So Zay Flowers is a guy that I'm considering right now a little bit more than maybe I would have before. The other name for me is Jalen Hyatt.
Yeah, I thought that's where you were going to go.
I've been slowly falling for Jalen Hyatt, and he cemented it here today. Just talking to him a little bit, he said he's in the 177, 178 range, which I think is a positive for him. We all had the fear that what if he comes in at 160, 165? Yeah. He's closer to 180, which we've seen guys succeed at that level or at that weight. He also said he was timed at 4.29 in high school. He wouldn't give us a speed for tomorrow. Yeah. But he had a little smirk on his face, like he's going to surprise some people. We all know he's fast. He can get over the top. Some people call him a one-trick pony. He didn't like that at all. Mm-hmm. He's not a one-trick pony. He says he's a route runner as well. We didn't see a lot of that at Tennessee. But he's talked to a lot of teams. He mentioned talking to Andy Reid in Kansas City, talking to Mike Tomlin with Pittsburgh, mentioned Green Bay as a team that was more interested in getting to know him personally rather than talk about what he does on the field. He said that Green Bay told him, we already know who you are as a football player. We've been spending a lot of time on you. We got to know how you are off the field, how you are as a teammate. So I thought that was interesting that he noticed that and he brought that up, mentioned the Giants and Carolina as other teams that he's talked to. So Hyatt was impressive. And I think you caught a quote from him about route running, right? That a lot of people were jotting down.
Yeah. He was asked about his route running. That's kind of been one of the criticisms, that he's just that go guy and can run deep, but maybe that's it. And he said, "Hey, I can run all the routes. I played in the SEC." So that was kind of. I don't know if people took that as a good answer. That just playing in the SEC doesn't bring excellent route running all the time. But he was definitely confident. I'm looking at these wide receivers. We've got those three that we think are going to be the top three guys, and I know in my rankings and our ADP, we've got some version of Jalen Hyatt, Zay Flowers, Josh Downs. Two of those guys, in my opinion, came out of today impressing. We talked about Hyatt and Zay Flowers already. And honestly, I think Mims impressed so much that I might put him in that same range, in that early second round range of rookie drafts. And I might even take Mims over Josh Downs.
Yeah, that's something we got to see what happens tomorrow, right?
Yeah,
we got to see these guys on the field. We got so many more notes, so many players. We got questions here. What about Addison? We'll get to him on future shows. We're actually thinking about doing this tomorrow night as well after we see these guys on the field. So if you're down for that, let us know if you can join us. That might get us to do it. We got to move on to the tight ends. Gosh, I'd love to talk about Addison. I'd love to talk about I talked to Tank Dell today. Heard from him. We didn't even get to kind of a sleeper for me. Jaden Reed was really impressive to me. I listened to him. He's way down there on a lot of Dynasty rankings, and I'm impressed. I want to see what he does tomorrow, so we'll bring him up when we do that. Let's get to a couple of these tight ends. My guy from South Dakota State, Tucker Kraft. I got to mention him real fast. He had a great quote, and he looked me right in the eyes, and I had asked him something about like running with reckless abandon, that he seems to have a mean streak, and he looked right at me and said, "You always have to be mean." And I thought to myself, yes, that's how you play on the field. He said he's 100% healthy. He talked about Dallas Goedert. He was a pretty impressive guy. Let's not sleep on him. I'm looking forward to seeing what our guy from South Dakota does, or South Dakota State, I should say. With the tight ends, Ryan, is there somebody that really stood out to you in a positive light?
Oh, I mean, it's got to be Michael Mayer.
Yeah.
He was
tight end one
for a lot of folks. He was already the tight end one, and I mean, this guy was captivating when he walked into the room. When he got up on that podium, I mean, he's a good-looking kid, looks like a model, and I mean, he owned the room, owned the space. And it was just super impressive. But it's funny you said that about was it Kraft? Yeah, about Kraft, kind of with that mean streak, because Mayer talked about one of his really what fuels him is, he called it a controlled madness, that he has a controlled madness when playing the game. So certainly similar to Kraft's mean streak, I guess. But Mayer was super impressive. We thought he would be. Both Dalton Kincaid and Musgrave are kind of nipping on Mayer's heels here as a possible tight end one in the NFL draft and in rookie drafts as well. I was not that impressed with either one.
Yeah, Musgrave especially. He was pretty short with his answers. He didn't seem all that comfortable. He seemed to be pretty happy with what he put on film and wants that to speak for him. It felt like these guys can completely erase this stuff tomorrow by playing well, by getting that draft capital. I always wonder though, if we get that impression in a media interview, are there GMs in interviews that are saying the same exact thing, that man, this guy just doesn't feel all that comfortable? Is he going to transition well to the NFL, especially a big city? So we don't know how all that really accounts for, or how these GMs account for that when they're valuing these players. Anything else from today, Ryan, that we got to hit on before we get out of here? There's so much, right? We talked to
Booty. Says he's going to run at a 4.3 tomorrow.
Yeah. Man, I can't believe I almost missed saying that. We'll see if that happens. He says he still sees himself as the wide receiver 1 in the class, even though he's lost so much value in the last year. We talked to Cedric Tillman. We heard from I can't think of all the names. Rashee Rice was one that we talked to. There's so much stuff happening over here in Indianapolis, and it was a fun day. We had a good time.
I would just say, and we talked a lot about how these guys are going to run tomorrow and perform on the field. The other thing that's happening in the morning for these guys, and again, that's quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends, heights and weights. And for so many of them, I mean, of course, the Bryce Young situation has been talked to death, and he was asked about that, about his height and his size. And, he essentially just brushed that off. But for so many of these players, a lot of the wide receivers, those numbers are going to be more important than whatever their 40-yard dash or 40-yard time might be. So we'll get those heights and weights rolling in the morning. I wish we could be there to see those guys get measured, but that's not something we have access to. We'll catch it on Twitter or on NFL.com.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep a close eye on it. So follow at DL Football on Twitter. I took that thing over for this weekend. So I'm sending everything out on that. Follow Ryan, of course, at RyanMC23. He's live tweeting everything he sees as well. I want to thank everybody that joined us tonight. I know a lot of you took some time on a Friday night where you could be with your family or out with some friends and stuff. It's raining here in Indy, so we're not going out. We'd rather talk to you guys, and this has been fun. What do you say we do it again tomorrow, Ryan?
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. For Ryan, I'm Dan. Thanks for watching this live edition of the DLF Dynasty podcast, and we'll catch you tomorrow night.